Good morning, everyone. If you are ready, I think now would be a good time to start the day. If I could ask for your attention, I'd like to introduce Mr. Morten Jespersen, the Undersecretary for Global Development and Cooperation of Danida, who will give a welcome remark on behalf of our hosts.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Dear guests, friends, colleagues. I would like, first of all, to welcome you all to Copenhagen. Weather is horrible, and I'm told that it's getting even worse, so we better stay here for the whole day. Let me say a few words on the process we have been through and a few words on where we expect us to go from here. We have come a long way since last JSI conference in Copenhagen, close to 20 months ago, back in March 13. At that time, it was still a joint standard initiative, and today we are here to celebrate the launching of a widely accepted Core Humanitarian Standard on Quality and Accountability, the CHS. It has been a long but very democratic and inclusive process, and the result, we believe, is very good. It's all about broad ownership with hundreds of humanitarian actors now behind it. That includes a number of NGOs, donors, and international agencies. It is an important tool for improving the quality and effectiveness of humanitarian assistance and for facilitating greater accountability to people and communities affected by crisis. Also, it is an important platform for communication and mutual learning, a signal that the various humanitarian actors have moved closer with willingness to cooperate on the basis of a common ground with the CHS. And the CHS confirms that the humanitarian principles, including the one on neutrality, are at the core of all humanitarian work. This is an important strengthening of the humanitarian principles, and one of the principles that we should definitely protect. It has and will be continue to be under pressure, so it's very, very important that we try and safeguard this as much as possible. SCHR also has succeeded in coming up with a suggestion for a sustainable mechanism for external verification and certification that will be available for those who want to walk the extra mile. Important that options are offered to both those who want to adopt the CHS and to those who want to endorse the CHS and be certified against it. The timing, we believe, for both initiatives is absolutely good and relevant. We all know that the challenges in the humanitarian sector have never been more serious than they are today. Urgent need for improving the effectiveness of our humanitarian assistance is absolutely needed. It's important that we work together in spreading the ownership of the CHS, and that an efficient and independent verification and certification mechanism is now being set up. Today's meeting is a good platform to discuss the way forward for the two initiatives, and important to agree on a concrete roadmap. It is our hope that we will all leave the conference by the end of today with good knowledge on the core humanitarian standards and an overview of the roadmap for establishing an external verification and certification mechanism, so that those actors who are still considering their position have enough information to go back to their respective agencies with recommendations on which step to take in near future. We are pleased to see this broad level of representation here today. It is extremely important that NGOs, international agencies, donors, and other civil society representatives keep on working together in order to continuously widen the scope for ownership. It is also important to keep momentum and that the outcomes of recommendation of the conference are fed into other relevant forums, such as the consultation process for the World Humanitarian Summit. Hopefully this will feed into this, and I know thoughts are already underway regarding this. I also just wanted to inform you that I'm here on behalf of the Danish Minister for Trade and Development. He's now in Brussels, so he couldn't make it. He would have loved to be here. He was broadcasted on Danish radio this morning, where he informed the Danish population on this initiative, that we are today having this conference, that this is a very important initiative, and he was clearly stating that full backing to this was highly expected and was already in good process. So we think that was very good that our minister at least was able to make that message to all of us. Finally, I wish us all a very good conference, very productive day, and thank you so much for coming to Copenhagen. Thank you.
I'm going to speak because I have to. I'm actually your facilitator for the day. My name is Raj Rana. I'm an independent consultant, and along with my colleague Paula Gil-Baizan, we have been the facilitators for the entire CHS development process in 2014. I'd been preparing for weeks to have the appropriate jokes, and I tested them last night, and I was told they were completely inappropriate, so I'm not going to use them. You probably figure because I'm the consultant, I should have a really clear idea of what's going to happen today. I can teach you some lessons from the CHS process. When we do an event, you should be never sure what happens. So I'm going to make you a few guarantees. Coffee breaks, kindly provided by Danita, will be served just out here in the lobby. And we'll have one in the morning and one in the afternoon. The lunch will be served somewhere around 12:15, again provided by Danita. It's a buffet with a sit-down lunch. It'll be on the ground floor. I can also guarantee at the end of today, I will be unemployed by the CHS. This has nothing to do with the quality of my work here. It's over for me. Now, one more thing to talk about before I talk about what we do today. I think we need to talk about the rules. You might have come here thinking maybe this will be done under Chatham House rules. Say, hi mom, we have 3 cameras in the room. The event is being streamed live on the interweb. Therefore, whatever you say could potentially go viral. So if someone stands up and says certification should be mandatory, it's out there. That was dead silent. That was a joke as well. Just a joke. I'd make a joke about MSF then writing a piece on their blog, but I'm going to skip that one. It's inappropriate. Today is actually a celebration day. It's kind of radical. You have 2 completely separate initiatives who have come together to do an event jointly to the same crowd. You're both interested in the findings. Obviously, they are distinct initiatives with links. I think that's very clear. After months and months of discussion, we have come up with this objective, which I think is modest, but definitely achievable for the day. At the end of the conference, participants will have an overview of the findings of both initiatives and explore their implications for the sector in order to inform decision-making within their organization. My suspicion is a lot of the organizations represented in the room already have a clear position. We still want to hear your views. How will we do this? 3 sessions, essentially. We've tried to get away from the standard panel discussion with no time for questions and do a mix of some talking, We're going to present the outcomes of both initiatives and the futures that are proposed. You will be able to hear from some panelists talking from their perspectives as an organization or as stakeholders, and we'll give time for discussions at the table level and to hear back from everyone at the plenary level. The closing session of the day, we don't want to give the impression that we're just downloading on you what we want. We want to take the findings from your discussions, put them together into some recommendations that we've presented back to you, and as the CHS and SCHR will make commitments about how they will use those in the future. I've already mentioned the lunch, the coffee breaks, the toilets are on the floor below. I don't think they've moved since I last looked. And I think that's about it. Are there any questions on the flow for the day? One last bit of housekeeping, and I don't want to forget this. All of these cameras are not only here to put us on the interweb. If you'd like to make a videotaped statement of support or an endorsement or a criticism for that matter, please contact Murray Garrard and Fiona Sinclair in the far corner of the room, and during the breaks in the lunch hour, you can do video interviews, which we would love to use for promotion material. Good? Questions on the day? Silence is golden. I would like to pass the floor to our key speaker. Before I do that, sorry, it's good I do these slides to tell me what comes next, otherwise I'd have no idea what's going on. Could you just take a few minutes to introduce yourselves at your table level? I'm not sure everyone knows each other, and I'm hoping and certain that you're sitting with people you've never seen before. So just take a few minutes, introduce who you are, where you're from.
No? I'm fine.
Two more minutes. Okay, I'm hoping you're all introduced. You know everyone's favorite color, their astrological sign. If I could ask for your attention, I'd like to pass the floor to Gui, who's the director of the Division for Corporate Programs from OCHA, who has very kindly offered to provide us with a keynote address. Gui, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Excellencies, dear guests and colleagues, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak at this event. I feel very privileged to be here today. I see this is an exceptional opportunity to have an open, frank, and much needed debate on critical steps to improving humanitarian effectiveness in practical and concrete terms. I hope you do too. With that in mind, I am going to raise some challenging questions. The humanitarian landscape is rapidly changing, requiring us to be ready and able to evolve as it does. The challenges are immense. Humanitarian groups are called on to deal with the consequences of crises that have their roots in conflict, poverty, inequality, and poor governance. These crises have fueled the highest levels of displacement, more than 50 million people, and the number of disasters associated with climate change, including storms and floods, increased by roughly 10 occurrences per year over the past decade. Urbanization and population growth are amplifying the impact of a humanitarian crisis on people living in densely populated areas. Naturally, the amount requested through humanitarian appeals has also risen, more than 5 times over the past 10 years, from 3 billion at the start of 2004 to 16.4 billion today, as announced this week in the latest humanitarian appeal by our Emergency Relief Coordinator, Valerie Amos. More than twice as many people, nearly 78 million, are in need of humanitarian assistance as compared to 10 years ago. The gap between available funds and the number of people in need continues to grow. Last week, the World Food Programme was forced to suspend its food aid to 1.7 million Syrian refugees because of acute funding shortages. A real-time, real-life example of the continuous struggle to raise these funds and how potentially devastating consequences can be. Extreme challenges forces change. We will recognize the need to improve and adapt the humanitarian system to address the challenges that exist today. We must make our work more effective, more efficient, and more accountable to affected people. Standards are one of the means to this end. Here comes the provocative part. Let me start by saying that I actually believe in standards, one of the key things I've been trying to promote in OCHA. The work of People in Aid, the Humanitarian Accountability Project, and the SCHR Project in bringing together the views of thousands of humanitarian aid workers in the development of the Core Humanitarian Standard is a tremendous accomplishment for the humanitarian sector. The initiative has established a clear and focused set of professional and ethical standards that humanitarian actors agree make up the foundation of our work. The initiative demonstrates the sector's commitment to equality and accountability. There are essentially 2 discrete schools of thought when it comes down to common humanitarian standards. The first school says we must have standards for accountability, to manage performance and to develop common understanding. I understand that most of people and most of you in this room today are alumni of this school. The other school says standards come with trade-offs. As the number of actors involved in humanitarian operations increases and diversifies, developing a common understanding of operational parameters and commonly shared principles is critical. Partners gaining significance in humanitarian response include the private sector, national NGOs, and diaspora groups. We welcome the emergence of these partners. They bring fresh perspectives, expertise, and ideas to the humanitarian arena. Inclusive standards that represent a broad global perspective can provide a common language between diverse organizations, be they religious or secular, large or small, based in the North or the South. In parallel to the Core Humanitarian Standard, our colleagues from the Steering Committee for Humanitarian Response at SCHR have been working diligently on efforts to develop a certification scheme with the commendable goal to bring some order into the chaos created in a crisis situation when relief organizations often descend on affected countries en masse. There are, however, risks associated with the use of certification and verification which could bring about unintentional consequences. We look forward to hearing the presentation by SCHR, which has taken great pains to consult widely and address potential concerns voiced by a variety of stakeholders. But by their very nature, standards can be exclusive. There are means to make an evaluation and premium on excellence and to make good practices the norm. At a time when we are striving for greater inclusivity, accessibility, and coordination with actors outside of the traditional humanitarian system, we must ensure that our efforts to do the right thing do not come at the cost of excluding others, particularly nationally based smaller NGOs. We must recognize that not everybody will identify with or want to be measured against the same standards. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Core Humanitarian Standard highlights and reinforces the humanitarian principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and operational independence. These principles are the practical tools that guide our work and ensure we can find ways to stay and deliver assistance. Embracing diversity while identifying common values will strengthen response in years to come. The emphasis placed on accountability to affected people in the Core Humanitarian Standard is the right way forward and is a reminder that we can have a greater and more sustainable impact when we engage more closely with the communities we serve. Humanitarian entities are promoting a people-centered approach to humanitarian action, recognizing that people affected by crisis are diverse and having different needs. A people-centered approach means the views of affected people must be taken into account in every aspect of a humanitarian response, from initial needs assessment to monitoring and evaluation. It means listening to people and feeding back to them on an ongoing and sustained basis. This approach anchors the thinking behind the IASC's work on accountability to affected people. When we put affected people at the center of humanitarian work, we hold ourselves to account primarily to them rather than to donors, member states, or the UN General Assembly. Yes, we have a responsibility to these entities, but if our work is not accountable to affected communities, then we cannot call it effective. There is room for improvement. The UN has much to learn from numerous NGOs that have long maintained close communication with the communities with whom they operate. We are learning that accountability is fundamental to all programming and is responsibility of all humanitarian actors, not the responsibility of specialists flown in from different capitals. But we are still learning how to operationalize accountability to affected people and to come to a consensus on what accountability actually means on the ground. Several recent evaluations of major humanitarian operations demonstrate that despite the commitments made by the IASC in December in 2011, we have yet to achieve a system-wide culture of accountability to affected populations. Although developing country-level collective plans of action is a fundamental foundation to system-wide accountability, aid agencies in many countries have yet to achieve this objective. The challenge we now face is to find better ways to reflect the views of affected people in decision-making fora, such as the Humanitarian Country Team or Intercluster Coordination Group. I want to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to be here today and to air some thought-provoking issues and questions. This has been a very good opportunity to put these challenging questions out in the open for critical debate and discussion. We have a major opportunity to make progress on these and other challenges with the first World Humanitarian Summit in May of 2016. Indeed, the first 3 regional consultations for the summit this year in Abidjan, Tokyo, and Pretoria stressed the importance of standards and accountability to affected people. One of the Tokyo's consultations conclusions was that accountability to affected people and the observation of the humanitarian principles are fundamental to effective humanitarian action. The Pretoria consultation called on governments to share good practices in the region on meeting minimum preparedness and response standards to improve effectiveness. With 5 more regional consultations scheduled over the next year, we can build on these ideas and this discussion. The work that the Core Humanitarian Standard initiative is doing would provide a strong foundation for these debates. We applaud the commitment made by People in Aid, the Humanitarian Accountability Partnership, and the SPHERE project to streamline and harmonize standards. We congratulate you on the inclusive process that you have undertaken, and we recognize there is more work to be done. As the process towards the Core Humanitarian Standard evolves, OCHA and other UN agencies will continue to engage and offer technical advice and support. Please count on the United Nations to provide support to you as you move on to this next important stage of the Common Humanitarian Standard development process. It's been 25 years since the adoption of the General Assembly Resolution 46-182, which is still the basis for the United Nations humanitarian coordination system. But we must face reality. The landscape has changed, and we must change with it. Today's event presents us with the opportunity to consider which coordination mechanisms and tools are fit for purpose and fit for the future. We, the UN, are committed working with you so that standards are a necessary part of improving the overall effectiveness of humanitarian action, particularly as we move towards the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your commitment to helping the most vulnerable now and also in the future. I wish you a very productive discussion today, resulting in improved delivery of humanitarian assistance around the world. Thank you.
Gui very kindly offered to take any questions or comments if we had a few. I've counted to 5. No? A big round of applause then for both our speakers. If I could actually ask to the stage now, Rain Paulson and Véronique de Geoffroy will actually jump into the first session on the CHS. We'll do the initial presentations and then we'll take a coffee break. That seem to work? What are we going to do for 2 hours? And I'm not going to stand on the stage. We'll have a quick introduction. We'll talk about the development of the standard over the course of 2014. We'll talk about a bit about the contents. We have Véronique, who's one of the writers, who helped us along the way. And then we'll hear about the future plans. And we'll have Rain Paulson, who is a board member of HAP, who will be there to talk us through that. Afterwards, one of the steps of the development process was testing of the CHS by 60 organizations. We're going to hear from 3 or 4 of them. I think we'll take a break. We have a video from the chair of SCHR who will talk a bit about their views on the CHS. We'll have a panel of different stakeholders that might use it. We will let you at the table level have conversations. I know this seems like a lot. We'll hear back from you and we'll wrap up. And yes, we can do that in 2 hours. I was recruited to do a few slides because we were hired as outsiders to ensure or to help make sure that the CHS development process was objective, that it was inclusive, and it was representative. And we can say that was the case. I don't want to talk to this slide much. You know the JSI, its history at this point, but I think it's important to note that not only 2,000 people participated, but the things they asked for in those bullet points do show up now in the final version of the CHS that we're launching today. What's most important, this is the beginning of the process we've done this year in developing the CHS. The commitment last June was that by the end of 2013, there would be a first core standard published for comments, and that happened. On the 9th of December, it was published, and there was 4 months where any stakeholder could provide comments using PDF forms. So this sort of ends off the Joint Standards Initiative and brings us into 2014. I'm sure you've all seen the document we provided that gives a summary and an overview of what the process looked like. The first page with the key figures actually gives you the best taste of what that process has looked like this year. All in all, we've had close to 1,000 contributions from individuals, organizations, alliances, and networks in the different phases of the development. We went through a total of 3 draft versions which were commented and or tested, ensuring that we got lots of feedback on how we evolved it, taking into account different, at times, contradictory opinions. Some of the key bodies that were involved, and there were new groups, the Technical Advisory Group, 64 representatives representing the geography of the world, different sectors, different types of organizations, who very kindly gave us a total of 5 days between April and October in setting the scope for what the CHS should look like, and then on behalf of the sector, approving, validating the final version that came out. This also included a straw poll, again, where any stakeholder could vote, and we had over 360 people who voted to 79% that the version brought to the tag was good enough for publication. A few other quick ones. We also had a writers group of up to 5 people representing different humanitarian organizations who were not part of the process directly, but took the comments that came in through the process and then came up with solutions in terms of the drafts that were developed. The unsung hero is the very last bullet point. When we had the second draft of the CHS, in addition to people being able to comment on a PDF version, 60 organizations committed to actually field testing the CHS as a standard at the project, program, and headquarters level. We'll hear a bit more from them later on, but this is a massive undertaking. People did a self-assessment against the standard as it was in version 2. They went through each section, each commitment, and gave mostly qualitative responses on how relevant it was, how applicable it was, how they were in fact thinking they would go about measuring themselves against it. What maybe doesn't come off the screen is the importance of the fact it was iterative. The people that did the commenting were not the people who were in the tag, were not the people who did the testing, who were not necessarily the people that did the straw poll. So as this went forward, it was being ran through different hands. The consistent groups in all of this were the writers, who worked on 2 versions, and the tag, who set the scope and then validated what came back to them 2 versions later. So the process as a whole, given the short time and resources available, was quite inclusive, and again, with 1,000 contributions. Very quickly, what came out with the tag meeting in April was quite interesting. It reinforced the first bullet point, which came out of the Joint Standards Initiative. It has to be a standard focused on communities and people affected by crisis. That was very clear and fully agreed to. There was, to be fair, quite a raging debate that started within the tag, trying to find a balance between what some people saw as very operational standards versus what others saw as being organizational standards. And this, Veronique will talk to, this has been addressed quite clearly. It's taken different forms, but in this version now, it's actions required and organizational responsibilities to make some sort of demarcation of different levels. The last 3 points in that bullet are actually quite important because it gave very much the spirit in the development of the CHS. Inclusive initially was the idea that it's not just humanitarian, development organizations can also use the CHS. As that discussion unfolded over the year, it was, well, it should be advocacy and human rights, and then it went much, much further down a road of saying, well, any non-traditional, non-mainstream humanitarian actor. So the idea was to make the CHS as applicable as possible to anyone who wants to use it. The future-proofed is probably quite obvious, but it was making sure that the contents, the substance reflects the debates and the changes that have happened in the sector over 20 years. And accessible also seems very simple. Accessible is everything from not increasing the amount of criteria to 120, making the language as simple as possible, and trying in as far as possible to avoid jargon or unnecessary text. That all sounds really simple until you have 64 people in the room who have to agree to all of this. Some very last points, and this, I call it user feedback, but it's very much the debates we are going through on the final version with the technical advisory group. What we came to conclusions on, and I'll admit it was hard fought, some of them, but a lot of investment to be clear on the structure and the application of the standard. Veronique and Rain will be talking a bit about it. Neutrality, it was out, it was out, it was in, it was in. It was a really lengthy debate. It was a debate. It's back in, and it also has a conditional clause for its application. And it seems that people consider this to be not only a core principle, but it was a debate that even those who weren't strongly in favor of it were able to come to an agreement that it would be in the final version. I think clearly the language shows that it strengthens the rights-based approach, and it was clear that we hadn't done enough about PSEA. It fits in several places in the final version. This is just a taste of some of the debates we were struggling with. To be fair, the debates struggled with in the CHS are the same ones in the sector as a whole. It's just a reflection, ultimately. I think I can stop talking about the process and hand over to Veronique from URD to talk about the CHS itself.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'm very pleased to present the CHS. And for those who remember some of our past discussion 15 years ago, when the first version of the SCHR project came out, it's quite strange that I am presenting the CHS. As Group URD, we are well known as being opposed to normalization, or very much in favor of contextualization of humanitarian aid. But we have been very pleased to be part of the process of writing the CHS, and I think that we went together a long way since 98, and we've moved together toward a more comprehensive and inclusive definition of the quality and accountability of humanitarian aid. So the CHS is a framework for those, being individuals or organizations, who want to find ways to ensure the quality of aid. And it facilitates greater accountability to people by knowing what they should expect from us. They will it facilitates greater accountability to people, knowing what they should expect from a humanitarian organization. So the CHS is based on a quite simple but interesting architecture. First of all, we have the 9 commitments. It's a bit like, the patient charter in hospital. You give the commitment, you can expect this from us, And the idea of the tag and the writing group was really to give a tool that you could print as humanitarian worker and stick to the tree in a refugee camp, give to the community leader, look, this is what we are committed in terms of quality and accountability. So the overall architecture of the CHS is based on these 9 commitments. For each one of these commitments, there is one supporting quality criteria, which describes 9 different but complementary characteristics of programs and organizations. And they encompass, you will find in the quality criteria, all the DAC criteria used normally in evaluation. You will find the common sphere standard, you will find the HAP and people in aid standards, and including we have put all the quality criteria of the quality compass in it. For each one of these criteria, there are two different levels: key actions and organizational responsibility. The key actions are about what should be done at project level, and organizational responsibility talk about what should be put in place in the organization to ensure that people at field level will be able to implement really the quality and accountability in their programs. It's interesting to see that the quality reference framework that can be used for evaluation or for verification is not only to be used for this final control. So this is where the quality assurance process is in the CHS. The criteria are not only for evaluation, but they are for the daily work. Yeah? So it gives a common understanding for all people working in the project and in the organization, a common sense what is quality and accountable humanitarian action. This two-layer structure is quite unique, I would say, in the landscape of quality management literature, and it was the result of hot debates within the different organizations and in the tag and the writing groups, because there were two different views. One, which is commonly used in other sectors, is based on the hypothesis that a good organization with good processes will lead to good products. But in the humanitarian sector, we are much more focused on the quality of the results, first of all, because we are from a project management culture, and you know that funding is based on project mainly. So the second trend was really to focus on the result, on the quality of the technical results. Yeah. Then we try to find a balance between both trends, and this is why we have these two layers structure. For each quality criteria, you have what does this mean concretely for field people in the project level, yeah, and what does this mean for the organization, what the organization should put in place to ensure this. And I think this structure is very interesting, I think also it's a way to ensure that no one size fits all. It will put really the context and the specificity of each context at the heart, at the core of the quality and accountability processes. So, we came out with this nice flower. I don't know if it's a daisy one or a rose. And as you can see, communities and people are at the center of this flower. And I think it's not only visually speaking, and not only being politically correct. Throughout the CHS, every key action at project and organizational level is really trying to focus on the communities, on the people. And knowing that every stakeholder may have different views and own understanding about what is important, we thought it was really important to put communities and people affected at the center of all the CHS. Just after that, you have the 4 humanitarian principles as a first round, yeah. And they are mainstreamed into the 9 commitments, and we make sure, and I remember we did some verification exercise just to make sure that, yes, the different 4 humanitarian principles were included, mainstreamed into the 9 commitments. So they are not a single commitment, but they are included in the 9 commitments. And then you have the 9 quality criteria here presented in this flower, and then their translation for the communities into the 9 commitments. Yeah. So the first 3 commitments, I don't know if you can read it with them. Yes. They relate to result and impact. They encompass the relevance, appropriateness of humanitarian aid. They talk about effectiveness, timeliness, and impact, including negative ones that we may avoid, that we must avoid. Yeah. So as you can see, for each commitment you have the related quality criterion. And it's not by chance that the first one is about relevance. Again, it's because we are talking about, first of all, the quality of the result for the population. Then, first of all, we have to make sure that what we bring is relevant to them, appropriate to them. And then we have to make sure that, yes, we deliver what we said we were going to deliver. So we are talking about effectiveness, timeliness, in due time. And then, yes, we have to be committed in terms of impact, not only result at short term, but impacts, great longer term impacts. Yeah, so those first 3 quality criterion and commitment are really the result and impacts one, the one most important in the views of the communities. And to support that, there is 6 criteria and commitment related to processes and structure, the way we are doing it, and the who is doing it. The way we are doing it, the fact that we must be accountable to the population, the process that should be in place are absolutely essential. So the number 4 being the one related to the communication with the communities. The number 5 being the one related to complaints mechanism. Then the 6 is the question of coordination. 7 being the one about learning organization and being sure that if we make mistake, we learn from the mistakes. The number 8 being the well-managed and competent staff, the fact that communities should be served by well-managed and competent volunteers and staff. And the 9, the last commitment, being the efficient use of resources and good management of resources. So, yeah, I think in a nutshell, this is the presentation of the CHS, its structure.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Veronique. Thank you, Raj. It's a pleasure to be with you all. As you've heard from Raj, he gave a quick snapshot, a view into the extensive process that has led into this. That process, of course, isn't a surprise to many, if not all of you in the room. You've been actively involved yourselves. And Veronique was able to give us a a clear summary and a view on this standard, which you should all have in front of you. It should be in your packages. There should be many copies on the table. I'm going to quickly say a few more things about the standard itself, and then also talk about a little bit about next steps and where we go from here. I'm going to keep it fairly short. Raj outlined an ambitious agenda for this session. We're very keen to give as much time as possible for discussion, for dialogue, for reflection. As you see, as we'll go through this, there are some things that we've done, we've completed, and we can and we will celebrate. And there are things that we need to continue to work on together as we push ahead with this, and we hope that that surfaces out of the conversations, the questions, not least the feedback we'll get from various testers and the panel discussions subsequently too. So then just quickly on the standard and on utilizing the standard, as I think you may have heard already, it's clearly been designed, intentionally been designed to be able to apply both at the organizational and individual level, but also been intended to and been designed to deal with organizations with a variety of operating approaches. So clearly it has direct relevance for organizations that directly implement activities in support of communities affected by crisis. Equally, it has strong relevance for those who work through partners, organizations that have a mixture of those approaches. There's certainly also relevance for entities that function as donors in the humanitarian system. So the design of this has been very deliberate to be inclusive and to be able to be applied across the gamut of organizations. With that in mind, the question around how institutions and organizations can associate themselves with the standard and what that looks like. We certainly hope and encourage as many organizations as possible, any and all organizations active in this work, to adopt the CHS, to be able to, on the basis of that, make statements about working towards the application of the CHS. We'd also say that as we've gone through this very deliberate, intensive design process, you will see that the CHS has been designed to be verifiable. And because of that intentional design, of course, it's only possible to talk about fully complying with the CHS as and when an organization has gone through some objective verification against the standard. There will be a monitoring, reporting and verification scheme in support of the CHS. That's going to be fine-tuned based on good practice in the sector. A lot of that work is already